I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a fascinating piece of Jewish journalism discussing the different ways in which different parts of the American Jewish community are responding to Donald Trump's presidency. The piece was done by one of American Jewry's foremost columnists, Jonathan Mark, the associate director of the Jewish Week of New York, who uses as a metaphor the well-known baseball poem, Casey at the Bat. You remember the iconic line that concludes that poem, "There is no joy in Mudville, mighty Casey has struck out." Jonathan Mark writes that there's no joy among liberal Jews who are in mourning over the election of Donald Trump. But there is, Jonathan writes, rejoicing in Orthodox communities of America, whereas Jonathan does a play on the poem's last stanza. The sun is shining bright, the men are laughing, children are shouting, all over the victory of Donald Trump. Well, what's this all say about modern Jewish life today? For some answers, I'm pleased to welcome back to JBS a dear friend for whom I have enormous personal regard, Jonathan Mark, who joins us now on our JBS phones. Jonathan, welcome back to JBS.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be with you.
Okay, Jonathan, what did you find when you surveyed the feelings of American Jews in different portions of the Jewish community?
Well, it's not a monolith. There are Jews who are concerned and are a little bit worried, but the great majority of Orthodox Jews I'm talking to are very happy about Donald Trump. They did their mourning in December when the UN Security Council had a resolution. They did their mourning when the 221 million check was written for the Palestinians. Now they're fine. Now they're okay with what's going on. They see a president who is favorable to religious liberties in the First Amendment sense in the courts and with the new justice pick. They see a president who is sympathetic to the settlements, and they're willing to take the chances.
Interesting. And so how does the liberal part of the Jewish community feel about these very same issues?
They're hesitant. I mean, the idea that the Jews were left out of the Holocaust statement last week is curious and of concern. They're not sure where these people are going because we don't really know them before from any political positions. So it's a little bit curious what's happening. On the other hand, it's a lot of, as with often is the case of politics, it's compared to what? Compared to people who have problems with the Western Wall being part of Israel? Well, it's terrific compared to that.
Interesting.
And even on the Supreme Court case, we're thrilled to have a potential justice who is sympathetic to religious liberties, as opposed to what's going on in the American courts today.
By the way, are you suggesting that the Jewish community across the board is happy with Neil Gorsuch's choice?
No. I'm saying there's happiness within the Orthodox community,
yes,
such as the Orthodox Union,
yes,
that here we have somebody who's sympathetic to religious liberty, because it's the Orthodox community, as opposed to the other denominations, who are hit with the religious liberty cases.
Yes, and by the way, it also applies to day schools as a form of, quote, parochial schools, and whether there will be some kind of funding for parochial schools, yes?
Right. That's why most people, in the community may not like the nominee for the education department, Betsy DeVos, but Orthodox people think it's terrific.
There seems also, Jonathan, in general to be a major difference between American attitudes towards Donald Trump on the East and West Coasts as opposed to the heartlands of America. Does this
Absolutely, no question about that.
I'm sorry, I was going to ask, does the same geographic difference seem to hold true for Jews as well who may live on either coast as opposed to inside America?
Yes, I think people who are living more in the inland, and I mean even for us in New York, Scranton is in inland, or Wilkes-Barre, or places in smaller towns, are more in touch with the problems of migration and the migrant refugees. They're more in touch with factories that are closing and economic trouble. Jews on the coast, for example, here in New York, we're more in touch with the financial markets, so we're doing fine. They don't feel financial. The Wall Street's doing great, and you don't see migrants moving into the Upper East Side. So everybody's pretty much fine, as opposed to places in Pennsylvania, let's say, small towns of less than 5,000 people.
Yes. Jonathan, is it fair for me to say that when we spoke during the election cycle, you were very much against Donald Trump? Is that fair?
Well, yes, it is fair. I mean, the fact is, if you ask me to pick any of the 17 guys who were on that Republican stage a year ago, I would have picked any one of them. I mean, I do think he's a crude person, at times vulgar. I don't know where he's impulsive. There are many things that I'm wary about, but what am I going to do? He's the guy I got, and it turns out that the guy I got happens to be very favorable to Jewish issues. A lot of people I spoke to made the Purim analogy, where they see Jared Kushner as Mordechai and they see Ivanka as Esther, but they also in that analogy is that Trump is Ahasuerus, who was a vulgar, drinking, orgy-infested guy, and he wasn't a particularly appealing person, the king in the Purim story. But nevertheless, he is the guy we have access to. He is the guy who saved the Jew, and better the buffoon in the palace than the intellectual who's going to sell Israel down the drain at the UN.
Yes. By the way, I was going to mention that you used that metaphor in your piece. I thought it was very, very well done. Again, I hope you understand what Jonathan was saying was there are Orthodox Jews in general too, who look at Trump as King Ahasuerus, the dumb, non-Jewish king, but Trump's daughter Ivanka is the Queen Esther, and his son-in-law Jared Kushner is in some way the Mordechai, and that's one way of looking at Donald Trump and his administration. But I asked you, Jonathan, again, I made the point that you were very much against Donald Trump, but that was before he was elected. And you have taken the position. Right. You've taken the position that, somebody like Alan Dershowitz has taken, where he says, "Look, he's now president. He is our president. He's everybody's president." And Dershowitz says, "I want to give him a chance, and I'm going to watch very closely. And if he does things that I think are not in the interest of America or in confluence with my own values, I'm going to speak out and I'm going to protest." So far, Jonathan, as you've seen Donald Trump, do you feel that he has in some way been a surprise to the good? Has he been a surprise to the bad? Or has he simply fulfilled some of your worst nightmares?
No, for me, overall, it's been good. I like the Supreme Court pick. I like the appointment of Friedman to be the ambassador to Israel. I like his basic attitudes towards the settlements and to Netanyahu, which is a relief after 8 years. On the other hand, I'm troubled by the Holocaust statement that left out Jews. And I'm not really sure about his... I wish I had a president who was able to summon up a more poetic turn of phrase and better explain himself. But overall, I'm very happy. And I found myself tremendously diametrically situated from my liberal brothers and sisters, because when Trump got elected, they were fasting. Some synagogues were calling for a fast.
Yes.
They were calling it day of mourning. Yes. Meanwhile, when Israel was crashed in the United Nations in December, no one in the liberal side had days of mourning. No one marched. No one showed up in Washington. No one wore special hats and was screaming. And yet, for Trump's election, they were screaming. So I'm wondering, where were they in December? Where were they for the past 8 years? So, I'm at totally different points of view from them. For me, Israel and the survival of the Jewish people are first and foremost my concern. They have other concerns, and it's becoming very apparent.
I want to follow this up for a moment. It is so fascinating to me, Jonathan. When you say Israel is your primary concern, to what extent are you also concerned, and I mean very concerned, with the well-being and the social fabric of our country, the United States of America. While
100%.
wait a minute,
I mean, obviously. I mean, that is, I mean, I'm living here. I love it here. I think that the United States is a reflection of God's will, and no country has done more for the good of the planet than the United States in the past 200 years, right? So if there's no United States, I don't think there's going to be an Israel either. So the United States is obviously up among my concerns, but like all my liberal friends who say that abortion is their concern or Black Lives Matter is their concern, everybody has other concerns. So the only person who doesn't have other concerns is the Jew. The Jew just adopts everybody else's main concern. So I'm saying on that presumption, where of course the United States is my number one way to vote. I'm not going to vote for Huey Long to be president, or I'm not going to vote for Steve Bannon to be president. But my main concern of all among the single issue people is the survival of the state of Israel.
Okay.
If we do think that tissue vote is one of the worst things that ever happened in our history, I can't sit by and allow Israel to be legitimized and just be a bystander.
Yes. By the way, I love the point you made a moment ago. There are a lot of American Jews who are in the streets protesting all kinds of issues, especially the election of Donald Trump. They will not be marching in the streets when President Obama permits a virulently anti-Israel resolution to pass the United Nations Security Council, because he withholds a traditional American veto. And your point is, you wish there were Jewish liberals who were as passionate about issues pertaining to the state of Israel as they were to other social issues confronting American society today, correct?
Correct. And I know there's caring about Israel, in the liberal movements, but I don't see them going into the street. I don't see them calling for special occasions of the way they did for Trump's election. And I just don't understand that. But I feel all the more for their abstention, so to speak, from on that. I feel I can't abstain on the Israel issue. If everybody was hanging out on the Israel issue too, I could have more time to worry about other things. But in the meantime, I have to worry about Israel because they won't. I have to worry about vouchers and tax breaks for yeshivas because they won't. I have to worry about separate hours for women to swim in Williamsburg, even though I don't live there and I'm not a chassid, because I know that the liberal community is trying to shut that down. I know that the liberal community under Bloomberg was trying to put 7 shopkeepers in Sotmer Williamsburg out of business because they have a dress code, the same dress code as in the fanciest restaurants in New York, but that doesn't matter. It was fancy. It's the same dress code in Brooklyn can get you put out of business. Mm-hmm. So I have to worry about these people because no one else will.
All right. You still consider yourself, Jonathan, a liberal Jew, correct?
I'm modern Orthodox. Emphasis on the modern, but also Orthodox.
Wait a minute. Can one be a modern Orthodox Jew and a liberal?
Yeah, I mean, politically, I grew up. I'm a registered Democrat, even to this day. I always loved Hubert Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy in '68 was my preferred candidate. So my tradition is that. But on the other hand, I'm not gonna have such fidelity to that I'm willing to let Israel be trashed. And I saw this when I can't imagine all these people in Congress, including many Jewish congressmen, they would never boycott the president of Turkey. They would never boycott, the worst people on the planet from Venezuela. If they came to Congress, to give them a standing ovation, just to be polite. But when Netanyahu comes, they stayed away. This was the most disgraceful, disrespectful thing I've ever seen. I can't let that go by and not be moved. Mm-hmm. And I can't let Israel be trashed at the UN and not be moved. And I'm as and the same way that I'm disgusted by what happened at the UN, I notice who sat it out on the American Jewish side, which is an awful lot of people.
Mm-hmm. there are many people who will say to you, if you voted for Donald Trump, but you did not, but if you are happy that you have Donald Trump as your president, it's the same thing as being happy about Steve Bannon being in the White House. That people who voted for Donald Trump, as far as the opposition is concerned, they voted for Steve Bannon. And for you to make a distinction, while I understand it, there are many people who would say, Jonathan, you're fooling yourself. Trump and Steve Bannon are the same person.
You know what? I take my chances. I mean, I have no choice. And you know what an example is? For example, Oskar Schindler was not a good person. He was a drunk. He cheated on his wife. He cheated in business. He associated with Nazis. And yet, you know, in 1944, I love Oskar Schindler.
Yes.
You know, there's plenty of dirt, you know, in the Trump inner sanctum. But who else do I have? They're the president. They're the White House people I have. They're going to stick up for Israel. And you know what? So that's it. They're going to stick up for religious liberty. They're going to peg a guy like this to be on the Supreme Court. They're going to cancel the $221 million to the Palestinians. So you know, I'm fine with that. I'm living with that because that's the world I'm living in. I'm not going to find, you know, a person of impeccable spiritual level to be my president or his inner sanctum. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
So this is what I'm taking. You know, I'd rather have Bannon than have John Kerry the way he was carrying on. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have Bannon than a lot of other people, you know, than even Bloomberg and de Blasio for going after Jewish religious issues here in New York City.
Mm-hmm. So, Jonathan, when you spoke to Orthodox Jews who support Trump, did they in any way speak about or feel there were flaws in President Trump?
Of course. No one thinks this guy is the greatest guy. I never heard about him the way I heard about, let's say, Bobby Kennedy in '68. I mean, no one spoke like that. No one spoke about him like even speaking about Jerry Ford or Ronald Reagan at the time. But it's the American political system is this one or that one. It's not a huge menu like in the Israeli vote, and it's not you're not picking the ideal. You're not picking the greatest people that we could possibly have. We have to pick who we got. And between who we got, then Trump is the guy. That was the feeling.
Okay. There are some people who really believe that Donald Trump is going to be in office 2 years and that he's going to do something which causes the Republican Party to seek his impeachment. Do you hear that? Do you fear that at all?
I think that can happen if the Democrats come into power, and I think he could do something crazy. And I think it's every bit as likely, if not more likely, that he will be assassinated. Because the level of hate that is being sanctioned in America, the hatred for Trump and the hatred for his people is so high, I think it reminds me exactly of the Rabin incitement before he was shot, which is a horrible thing. For example, in Central Park, somebody put up a granite tombstone with Trump on it. Now, if that was for Rabin or if that was for Obama, it would be on the front page of every newspaper.
Absolutely.
But it was not.
Absolutely. By the way, again, you're suggesting that this threat and this hatred is coming from the left, the liberal community, which when I was a young liberal, it was unthinkable not to be in favor of free speech and against the kind of fascist language that is coming out of the far left today. And it pains me as someone who has been, again, I'm like every other young Jewish kid on the East Coast. I grow up a Democrat and a absolute passionate liberal. And Jonathan, I continue to feel that is my orientation. I feel, however, at the same time, that the values which were representative of all that my parents were, my upbringing was, that has been lost for partisan purposes, and that much of the style, and again, I call it a fascist rhetoric, that now characterizes those left who are marching in the streets and calling for, if not the death of a president, They are rejecting the democratically elected President of the United States. To me, it is so representative of everything that was illiberal, against liberalism, and I still continue to feel in some way it's a betrayal of all that you and I were growing up as liberal Jews. What's your sense?
I agree with you 100%, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. I think Dennis Prager makes a good distinction between the liberalism of our childhoods and the leftism and the attitude of the left that has taken over the former liberal precincts. And I see it in journalism too. Unfortunately, I see, the nastiest, even in religious liberty. For example, the articles about that it's okay to from shame, to make fun of the religiousness of a convert, Ivanka. It's so disgusting. And the only people I think who are really standing up to this, like David Suissa, who's the editor of the Los Angeles Jewish Journal, he's one of the few people who's maintaining that dignity, that middle ground dignity that you speak so correctly of. And I don't see it. I think that today people, including rabbis, feel they feel sanctioned, like all bets are off in terms of what you could say about somebody that you disagree with politically. It's like the movie It's a Wonderful Life, where the Bedford Fair Falls we grew up is turning into Pottersville. And I don't get it. I don't understand it. See, as much as I dislike Trump, which I did, and I always told you that, I see that the other side is trying to lower themselves to Trump level and going beneath him. So I'm wondering, is there any bottom to how low the hatred can go when everybody is validating each other in terms of the hatred? Mm-hmm. I find that Trump people are less inclined, at least in my circles, Trump people are less inclined to admit it than the Trump haters. Mm-hmm. And when I say Trump haters, I mean haters with a capital H, because it's so frightening. Yes. And yet this. I find real anti-Semitism going on here, but it's not the anti-Semitism that the left is trying to make it. All of a sudden, they're discovering anti-Semitism if they could pin it on Trump, which is it's just the most horrible accusation, and it's becoming so prevalent.
Okay,
and I think it's one of the phoniest issues, by the way, in America right
Absolutely.
now. Anti-Semitism, the way they
Absolutely. And I want
to let me make that clear. Not that there isn't a swastika on some wall in Kansas City or something like that. But, it's interesting. I hang out with Jews almost entirely. I work with Jews. I go to shul with Jews. I live in a Jewish neighborhood. And nobody I know told me they were ever attacked. It's interesting. If this is the greatest anti-Semitism wave since Trump, how come we don't know people by the dozens, even by the fives or threes, who've been attacked? Nobody's been attacked, but it's supposed to be the worst anti-Semitism, neo-Nazi level. So it's just strange to me that the same people who approved of the Nazis marching to Skokie now think that Trump is worse than that, or that neo-Nazis somewhere in the vicinity are okay. I don't get the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And I want to remind our audience, Jonathan Mark grew up as a liberal, is a Democrat, did not vote for Donald Trump, and all he's trying to do is give an objective analysis of what is happening today inside the Jewish community. Now, Jonathan, I want to try to push you, because I also know there are very good, passionate, committed Jews, committed to Jewish life, committed to the state of Israel, committed to the Jewish future, who at the same time look at some of the things that Donald Trump said during the campaign, and anything he said during the campaign now is assumed what he's doing in office. There's no sophistication. Everybody who runs for office says things. The question is, what do they do when they're in office? But one of the things that has just brought out irate criticism across the Jewish spectrum was the president's executive order by which he suspended immigration from 7 countries on the grounds that we had to do better vetting before we were allowing those immigrants to come in. Although the word Muslim is not used in the executive order, because Donald Trump once referred to a Muslim ban early in his campaign, it has been characterized by the media on the one hand and by the Jewish community as a Muslim ban again, and he is being hammered. This executive order came after the piece you wrote, so I'd have to ask you to extrapolate a bit. But I'd love you to speak for a moment about the Jewish community's across-the-board reaction condemning Trump for this executive order.
Well, what I'm hearing is two things that are interesting. One, that if you were a black person 30 years ago, 40 years ago, would you want all the people who believed in apartheid to come into America? You probably wouldn't. And if you were a gay person, would you want people who hated gays to come into America? Would you accept freely admitting gay haters, homophobes? Of course you wouldn't. But somehow the Jew is being asked to overlook that Syrian refugees are some of the most anti-Semitic people on earth. And all these 7 countries happen to be some of the most anti-Semitic countries on earth. Some of whom are Holocaust denier countries, some of whom want another Holocaust, Iran in particular. And I'm supposed to want them to come into America? I don't see that at all. Mm-hmm. And no one else would want someone who hates them as much as to want another Holocaust of them would want them coming into America. Only I, as a Jew, I'm supposed to welcome true neo-Nazis to come into America. I can't buy into that. At the same point as that, I have some family who deals with archaeology and Near East studies. He can't go into 30 countries in the Middle East because it shows Israel on his passport. Jews are not admitted to countries from all over the Middle East. Jews are not admitted. Anybody ever protested that? Anybody ever went into the street and made an issue about that? That Jews are not allowed anywhere into Middle Eastern countries? Of course not. No one cares about that. But we're supposed to worry about Syrian Jew haters coming into America.
Yes,
so frankly, I don't care.
Jonathan,
these are people who hate me, and people who don't on the outside, and people on the inside of America who don't care about me.
Okay,
so
Jonathan,
either side, I don't want any part of.
Okay, but Jonathan, the difference is, it's one thing to protest about a policy a million miles away. It's another thing to feel strongly about a policy that represents our own society. And that's what you're hearing.
Except these are American citizens who are being denied entry into Middle Eastern countries. And no one cares about it in the State Department, and no one cares about it elsewhere. It's clearly an American issue, too. Because if any other country wouldn't allow women or wouldn't allow gays in, I promise you it wouldn't be said to be a million miles away. It's none of our business.
Okay.
Now,
hold on. Jonathan,
yeah.
I am grabbed by the clock. You are you're fabulous. You're not only a great journalist, but you are a thoughtful and passionate Jew. You've got to come into the studio, and we got to get a panel together that includes you to talk about these issues. You are absolutely wonderful, and I thank you as always for giving me time. Keep writing, and I'll keep chasing you.
Okay, thank you. I love you. I love your programs, and I hope to see you anytime.
Thank you, Jonathan. The thoughts of Jonathan Mark, the associate editor of the Jewish Week of New York, and again, a passionate liberal who has made a journey himself, and he says things that should make all of us think. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, program coordinator, Serge Goldberg, editors, Dennis Golan and John McDevitt, to JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.